They were young, wild in love, and vanishing into the heat-shimmered silence of the Arizona desert. On the morning of March 14, 1987, Jonah and Rebecca Linton left their small home in Tucson for a long weekend in the high desert, celebrating 2 years of marriage with nothing but their Ford Bronco, a Polaroid camera, and each other. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. For 16 years, their families believed they had been swallowed by the desert, lost to wind, dust, and the kind of silence that keeps secrets better than any man. No wreckage, no calls, no goodbyes, until two hikers stumbled upon a jawbone. In a dried-out gulch, what followed was a chain of events so disturbing, so buried in silence and bureaucratic neglect, that it left even seasoned investigators shaken. This is not just a missing persons case. It is a story about what happens when a town looks away, and the earth decides it is time to speak. Why did it take 16 years to find the truth, when the clues were in plain sight? And who else knew what was buried beneath those desert sands, long before the rains revealed it? If you want to uncover the chilling answers to these questions, then stay with us. Like this video, subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and help us reach 5,000 likes. That is not just a goal, it is a dare from my mother, and trust me, you do not want to see me lose that one. So do it for her. And now, Part 1, The Disappearance of Jonah and Rebecca Linton. On March 17, 1987, Gloria Mendez walked into the Tucson Police Department, shaking so hard she could barely speak. Her younger sister Rebecca had not checked in since the morning of the 15th, when she called to say they had made it near the Arizona-New Mexico border. Jonah and Rebecca had left for a weekend retreat on the 14th, planning to camp under the stars near the Chiricahua Mountains, far from crowds or city lights. Jonah, 29, was an auto electrician who loved building things from scratch. Rebecca, 27, was a school teacher who spent her weekends hiking and taking photographs. They had no enemies, no debts, no reason to run. They were simply gone. Assigned to the case was Detective Leon Calderon, a 20-year veteran of the force. He had seen dozens of disappearances, but something about this one struck him wrong. There were no signs of stress in the marriage, no issues with money. Every trace of their life painted them as stable, affectionate, deeply connected. Calderon began retracing their last known steps. He found surveillance footage from a gas station in Safford, Jonah and Rebecca laughing, buying water and trail snacks, asking the clerk about quiet spots to camp. They seemed completely at ease. That same evening, records showed they checked into a roadside motel in Dos Cabezos, but when staff entered the room the next morning, it was as if time had frozen. Clothes folded on the dresser, camera on the nightstand, bed untouched, no evidence of packing, no forced entry, no distress, just an eerie, frozen stillness. When detectives developed the film from Rebecca's camera, they found pictures from their hike the evening of the 14th desert trails. Strange rock formations, Rebecca pointing toward a distant dune. But one photo stood out. In the far background, just near the horizon, was the faint outline of another vehicle. It was not theirs. It was a truck, parked where no trail reached, partially hidden behind a rise in the sand. That photo would become the last known image of Jonah and Rebecca alive. Then came a crack in the silence. A waitress named Julia Escobedo came forward 2 weeks later. She had worked a late shift at a diner just outside Dos Cabezos the night Jonah and Rebecca disappeared. Around 10 p.m., she stepped out back for a smoke and saw something she could never forget. A woman, who looked just like Rebecca, being pulled into a pickup truck by force. A man, probably Jonah, tried to stop it. He was shoved down. Julia had written part of the license plate number on a napkin, just in case. She had not come forward sooner because she feared deportation, but the guilt had eaten at her. That napkin, faded and torn, read RJ7-something. It was the first real lead, and it was about to crack the silence wide open. The napkin was old, folded and stained with coffee, but the partial plate number was just enough. Ray J7-something. Detective Leon Calderon entered it into the system and cross-referenced vehicles registered across southern Arizona that fit the description of a dark-colored pickup truck from the mid-1980s. After 2 days, a match surfaced. A 1983 Dodge pickup registered to Curtis Roy Harlan, a 43-year-old parolee with a disturbing history. Harlan had served time for aggravated assault and attempted kidnapping. He was released just 4 months before Jonah and Rebecca disappeared. Calderon wasted no time. A team was sent to track Harlan, who was believed to be living off-grid somewhere near the Dragoon Mountains. After a week of searching, they found him camped out beneath a rusting tin awning, alone, surrounded by tools, crates, and 2 old generators. His truck was there too, parked half-sunken in a wash. When questioned, Harlan denied knowing anything about the Lintons. He said he had been hunting. Just passing through. But the inside of the truck told a different story. Investigators found strands of long, dark hair under the seat, rope in the truck bed, a pocket knife with dried blood. In the glove box was a map with a stretch of desert circled in red, the exact area east of Das Cabezas where Rebecca's final photo had been taken. Forensics confirmed the blood type matched Rebecca's. Harlan was arrested on suspicion of abduction and attempted murder, but no bodies had been found. There was no proof of what had happened after that terrible night. For 2 days, Harlan refused to speak. He sat motionless during interrogations, staring at the walls, mumbling about the heat and how the desert had a memory. Then, late on the third night, something shifted. With no warning, he leaned forward and said 5 quiet words that froze. The room. They never left the dirt. Calderon blinked. He asked what that meant. Harlan looked up and smiled, not wide, not kind, but like someone remembering a secret. He said he had followed the couple from the motel, watched them from the tree line until their Bronco stopped at a quiet dune formation. He approached pretending his truck had broken down, asked for help. When Jonah offered assistance, Harlan pulled a gun, tied him up, forced Rebecca into his own vehicle. Jonah tried to fight back. He was brave, Harlan said, but the desert does not care about bravery. He drove them both farther into the backcountry, past where the dirt road stopped, into an area known to locals as Whisper Sink, a stretch of land where the ground looked dry but moved beneath your boots. Some believed it was a buried riverbed. Others called it a trick of geology. Harlan called it something else. The desert's mouth. He told them to get out, forced them to walk. The ground dipped and gave way. Jonah fought, tried to pull Rebecca free. The more they moved, the faster the sand gave way beneath them. Harlan claimed he never pulled the trigger. He said he did not have to. I let the desert do what it wanted, he whispered to Calderon and the others in the room. It sounded like madness. But locals had long whispered about areas like that. Patches of land where hidden springs made the earth soft and unstable. Quicksand in a desert. Disguise. Some cattle had vanished that way. Hikers too. What Harlan described was horrible, but it was possible. Still, there were no bodies. The courts needed evidence, not ghost stories. But with the confession, the blood and the rope matching fibers from the motel scene, it was enough to charge him. In 1988, Curtis Roy Harlan was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of Jonah and Rebecca Linton, even though no graves were found. The case was considered closed. The desert had swallowed the rest. But 16 years later, the desert would spit it all back out. It started with a storm. Not the kind that comes with warning sirens or news coverage. No, this one built slow and silent over the course of a week. In late June 2003, summer rains had come early that year, strange and heavy for the Arizona highlands. Thunder cracked across the desert sky. Flash floods tore through dry washes like sudden rivers. Dirt became mud. Rock walls gave way. For a few days, parts of the old Chiricahua Basin were completely unreachable, and then, the desert shifted. Jeff and Dana Whitmore were visiting from Kansas, a married couple traveling in an old RV. They had taken a detour off Highway 186 after the rains cleared, hoping to spot desert wildlife along the dry stream beds, but near a place marked only by an old fence post and a collapsed cattle gate, Dana noticed something strange sticking out of a split in the earth. At first, she thought it was driftwood, caught in the tangled roots of a creosote bush. Then she saw the shape, teeth. They called it in right away. Within hours, the site was sealed off by local authorities. Crime scene tape stretched across the newly formed ravine. Forensic teams were flown in, and as they began carefully excavating the area where the earth had given way, what they found stopped everyone cold. 2 sets of remains, bound together by fragments of rope, preserved in layers of compact earth and sand. It was almost as if the desert had tried to protect them, tucking them away from heat, from animals, from time itself. The bones were not scattered. They were held in place, still positioned as they had been when they were buried, still holding the truth. DNA testing confirmed what Calderon, long retired by then, had always feared. The remains belonged to Jonah and Rebecca Linton. 16 years after they vanished into the silence of the Sonoran Desert, they had been found just 7 miles from where their last photograph was taken. The same spot Curtis Roy Harlan had described in his confession. A place the search teams had passed over a dozen times. Whisper Sink, the hidden earth. What startled investigators the most was the condition of the remains. Though dry air often decays bodies quickly in the desert, the combination of buried sediment, absence of oxygen, and occasional underground moisture had kept the bones from fully breaking down. There were even remnants of Rebecca's clothes, the faded stitching on her hiking jacket, and pieces of her shoelaces still tied. Jonah's arms showed clear signs of fractures in both forearms. Classic defensive wounds. Rebecca's skull had a hairline fracture near the base, likely from a blunt strike before burial. But there were no bullet holes, no blade cuts. Their deaths, just as Harlan had claimed, had come slowly, not from a weapon. From the Earth.News. Broke quickly. Local headlines screamed that the Linton mystery had been solved. People who had forgotten the case began to remember. Some wept. Others apologized for not believing the family. And while justice had technically been served years earlier, something felt unfinished. Because now that Jonah and Rebecca had finally come home, the question became not only how they died, but why it had taken so long for anyone to find them. The desert had hidden them well, but that was not all it had kept. Just a few feet away. Beneath another cracked layer of ground, searchers found something else, something no one expected. Another body, smaller, younger, and with it, a name that would open a whole new chapter in this story. The discovery of Jonah and Rebecca should have been the end. It felt like closure, like the desert had finally given up its dead. But as forensic crews packed up their tools and began to scan the rest of the exposed gulch for loose debris, one technician noticed something unusual. A small depression in the earth, not far from where the couple had been uncovered, had caved, indifferently than the rest of the wash. The soil was darker, denser, and when they brushed it back, just beneath the surface, something else came into view. Tiny bones, a wrist, and wrapped around it, still clinging through years of dust and time, was a plastic wristwatch faded by the sun. Next to it, buried just inches deeper, was a pendant, a thin silver charm, no bigger than a thumbprint. It glinted softly when they lifted it into the light. Engraved on the back was a single word, Miguel. The site was shut down again. Teams moved carefully, working slowly to preserve what little remained. The bones, smaller than those of the Lintons, were determined to belong to a teenage male, likely between the ages of 14 and 17. Judging by what was left of the fabric fibers and the size of the shoes, the boy had been slight, barely above 5 feet. Forensic anthropologists estimated his death occurred sometime between 1984 and 1986. No dental records matched, no school reports, nothing in the immediate area had ever been filed for a missing teen named Miguel. The case stalled for a few days, until Evelyn Franco got involved. Franco had been a young deputy in the mid-1980s. She had assisted briefly on the Linton case when it first opened. Since then, she had become one of Arizona's most respected cold case detectives. When she heard about the second body found near Jonah and Rebecca's grave, she began to dig, not just into evidence, but into her old handwritten notes. And there it was. Miguel Ortiz, 15 years old, reported missing from Wilcox, Arizona in July of 1985. He had gone fishing that morning at a river bend about 10 miles from his home. Never came back. At the time, it had been written off as a likely runaway case. Miguel was the son of migrant workers, quiet, no known friends. No one pushed hard when he disappeared. His mother, Lourdes Ortiz, had gone from station to station, asking for help. Most officers told her the same thing. He probably crossed the border, or maybe he just left. But now, Franco had the proof no one had cared to find. The pendant found with the body was a first. Communion gift, Lourdes had described it in her original missing persons report. A cross engraved with Miguel's name. On the back, she had saved up 2 weeks' wages to buy it. And now, 18 years later, it was the only piece of him still whole. Miguel's death changed everything. Franco kept digging. If Miguel had been killed in the same area as Jonah and Rebecca, could there be others? She combed through case files, newspaper clippings, and old handwritten logs from small-town departments. And what she found was chilling. 7 disappearances. All between 1983 and 1986. All young, some teenagers, one college student, one waitress on her way home. Every one of them vanished somewhere within an 80-mile stretch of high desert between Das, Cabezas, Wilcox, and Portal. None had been connected at the time, but all of them went missing during the exact years Curtis Roy Harlan was roaming the region, alone, unmonitored, and living off-grid. The picture was becoming clear. Jonah and Rebecca were not just random victims, they were part of something much larger, something no one had wanted to believe. But the most disturbing revelation came not from files or maps or bones. It came in an envelope. Because not long after Miguel was identified, Marcus Linton, Jonah's younger brother, received a letter in the mail. No return address. Postmarked from the state penitentiary where Harlan had been serving his sentence. Inside was one simple note, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. I was not the only one who knew where they were. The desert hides bones, but people hide guilt, and it was signed Curtis. But who else had known where the Lintons were buried? And what had they been hiding for so many years? The discovery of Miguel Ortiz shattered what little sense of closure the Linton case had offered. His small, fragile bones buried just feet from Jonah and Rebecca told the world what Detective Evelyn Franco had already begun to suspect. Curtis Roy Harlan was not a man who made one terrible mistake. He was a predator, one who had hunted in silence while people looked the other way. But the question that haunted her most was simple. If Miguel was buried here, who else might be? Franco reopened everything. She locked herself in the cold case. Archives for days, poring through old files with fresh eyes. She matched maps, travel logs, parole routes. She studied the patterns of disappearances, each one subtle on its own, but together, unmistakable. Between 1983 and 1986, 7 young people vanished across an 80-mile stretch of desert land. None had been connected. Not until now. She noticed they all disappeared in spring or summer. All were last seen near wilderness areas, border roads, or rest stops. All of them during the exact years Harlan moved freely through the region, unsupervised, undocumented, and protected by people who found him useful. Angela Bryn, a 19-year-old student, had vanished just over a year before. The Lintons, she was last seen hitchhiking with a sketchbook and her favorite green backpack. Her mother had filed reports, gone to the sheriff's office in person, begged. She was told to move on. Told her daughter probably ran off. The case was closed quietly, forgotten by the system. Until now. As forensic teams expanded their search, around Whisper Sink, they found another collapsed patch of soil near where Miguel had been found. It was deeper, older. Inside, they uncovered a third burial, a body partially wrapped in fabric, still wearing a rusted bracelet and the buckle of a backpack strap. Though the skeleton was too deteriorated for a full ID, the bracelet matched the description Angela's mother had given years earlier. The engraving was still faintly visible under the corrosion. Angela Bryn had never left. She had been there, the whole time, waiting to be heard. And that was not all. In the weeks that followed, forensic dogs hit on another site, just northeast of the main burial cluster. The area was too damaged by flood erosion for a full excavation, but bone fragments and clothing scraps were found. One of them carried the brand of a rare hiking boot discontinued in 1984. The same kind, worn by a missing teenage boy named Carlos Rivera. His case, too, had been dismissed as a runaway. The bodies told the story no one had written down. Harlan had used the desert like a canvas, hiding his crimes beneath the sand, trusting time and heat and indifference to keep it secret. But now, the land had opened. The secrets had surfaced. And the silence was broken. It was not just one killer, it was a system that ignored the missing, that told poor families their children had wandered off, that called scared witnesses unreliable, and a town that turned its back until it could no longer look away. After the final remains were identified, Evelyn Franco held a press conference. She did not stand with officers behind her. She stood alone, holding the photos of each victim. Jonah, Rebecca, Miguel, Angela, Carlos, and 2 others still awaiting full identification. She said only this. This was preventable. It should never have taken this long. The earth remembered. We did not. The crowd was silent. Some wept. The state responded by expanding the Torres reform, pushing for mandatory reviews of all cold cases every 5 years, especially those involving missing persons in rural regions. Independent investigators were assigned to handle parole files, and the land around Whisper Sink was officially declared protected ground. A memorial was installed near the center of the recovered site. 7 markers, 1 for each life lost, and beneath them, carved into stone, a final message. The desert kept them, but not forever. Still, long after the press left and the headlines faded, one line from Harlan's letter haunted Marcus Linton more than anything else. I was not the only one who knew. So the question remains, who else knew where the bodies were buried? The wind was quiet that morning, not silent, just quiet in the way that makes you stop walking. Makes you listen without knowing why. The kind of stillness that feels like breath held in the air. Marcus Linton stood alone near the edge of the arroyo, the same broken stretch of land, where 16 years of mystery had finally come undone. The sun had just begun to rise behind the distant ridgelines. Pale orange light spilled across the stone and sand, touching the tops of faded memorial flags and small wooden crosses that had been placed by the families who once thought they were alone. But they were not alone, not anymore. Marcus carried something with him. It was not heavy, just a small steel plaque, cold to the touch, with 7 names etched into it by hand. Jonah Linton, Miguel Ortiz and Angela Bryn, and Carlos Rivera. 2 names still marked only as unknown. But they were not unknown to him. They were voices, frozen in time. People the world tried to forget. He placed the plaque into the earth with care, pressing it into the softened dirt near where his brother's remains had been found. There was no ceremony, no crowd, just the wind, the rising sun, and the quiet presence of something larger than grief. He stepped back and read the inscription once more. Here lies silence undone. Found, not lost. Loved, not forgotten. For a long time, he did not move. He thought of the days when no one would believe Rebecca had called her sister. When the motel room stood untouched, still smelling of clean linens and desert dust. When a waitress had seen something horrible and was too afraid to speak. When the only photograph left behind had shown more than anyone realized. He thought of the letter, of Harlan's final words. I was not the only one who knew, but in that moment, standing there, Marcus no longer cared about the people who stayed silent. He cared about the ones who had finally been heard. Every story in that sand had waited years to be uncovered, and now they were here. Laid bare by water and wind and time, and by people who refused to let the silence win. Evelyn's investigation had exposed what others had buried. Gabriela Ruiz's reporting had made sure no name disappeared again without questions. The Torres reform was not just a law, it was a promise, and Marcus had kept his own. He had brought his brother home. As the sun climbed higher, the ground warmed beneath his feet. A breeze stirred the creosote, and in that stillness, the desert no longer felt cruel, it felt still, like it had finished telling a long, painful story. A story no one wanted to hear, until they had no choice but to listen. Because the desert does not forget, it remembers, and now, so do we. If you are still watching this story, then you already know it matters. These lives mattered. Their stories mattered. So please, give this video a like and subscribe to Unscripted Tales. Help me reach 5,000 likes. Not just because it is a dare from my mother, though it is, but because these voices deserve to be heard. Every single one. Comment done if you have liked and subscribed. It is completely free, and it truly means a lot. And tell me from which city are you watching this story? Because stories like this should never be buried again.